Hey, what's going on, guys? So we are continuing with our series about things to work on in the off season, where we're hitting on our skill work development. So with our skill work development, we have lifting positions, gymnastics positions, and then skill acquisition. In this video, we're going to be talking about semi-level and games level athletes, as well as quarterfinal level athletes. So when we're looking at skill development, it's important to assess the level of athlete because there's some assumptions that we can make about that athlete and the things that they're going to need to work on in the off season. For example, if we have a semi-level athlete, we can assume that they have the required strength requisite, but they might be lifting or missing certain lifting positions or certain gymnastics positions to really get them to the next level. Clean up their movement a little bit. So the first thing that we're kind of chatting about is developing your lifting positions. So when we take a look at an athlete, our goal always is to lift identical to how Olympic weightlifters are lifting in regards to your 1 rep max. So we're going to take a look at a semi-level athlete's lifting mechanics and see how we can get that athlete closer to an Olympic level weightlifter. Because CrossFit creates a lot of compensation patterns, we need to fix those patterns as we see them in the athlete's lifts. So this could be a mobility thing. If the athlete holds a lot of tension in their body, we might need to loosen up their shoulder flexion. We might need to loosen up their pec muscles. We might need to loosen up their quads. They might have tight ankles from all the bounding in CrossFit, but that's kind of our first step. Do they have the requisite mobility to get into weightlifting positions? Next, we'll take a look at the posterior chain. CrossFit is a very anterior dominant sport, which means our posterior chain gets a lot of neglect. During the off season, this is a great time to improve that portion of the body and get it stronger, catch it back up to all the anterior chain work that has been happening over the course of the season. So we'll want to look at their hinging mechanics and the musculature that they're using to do those hinging movements. Next thing we're going to look at is their hanging position. Do they have the requisite shoulder strength to hang efficiently from a bar? If you guys take a look at a lot of people's muscle ups, or chest to bars or toes to bar, we might see a little bit of a bend in the elbow during those for hanging on a pull-up bar. If we can improve that, we likely can improve their capacity in a certain movement, which will get them to breathe, will also get them to breathe better in the given movement as well. Upper back strength, just because everything sits on the front rack, we need to make sure that we have a strong upper back, and it tends to get neglected a lot in the sport as well. This will help with a lot of our gymnastics movements. So if you guys see people crumpling in their front squat or weak on their catch and their snatch, a lot of that comes from a weak upper back. So we need to create some strength around that upper back. A couple other things, we need to make sure the athlete is using their legs in their lifts. A lot of time people just get used to ripping that bar off the ground. We want to make sure that they're using their legs. This will drive more power because the legs need to be so strong for CrossFit. We need to take a look at their pull off the ground. If they're not getting that bar moving backwards off the ground, it's just going to be an inefficient lift coming off of the bar. Then the last thing we can take a look at is what their barbell cycling looks like. So we want them to look like weightlifters for their 1 RM maxes. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at their barbell cycling, as this is an important part of the sport at the level that they're competing at. So making sure we develop different movement styles for touch and go reps, whether that be no foot snatches, whether that be power snatches, whether that be snaking a lightweight barbell up overhead. These are all kind of things that we'll look at in regards to a semi-level athlete and try and work on improving in the off season. The next thing we have for them is developing gymnastics positions. So this will be thoracic, and a lot of this just comes from strengthening certain positions and making sure those positions are mobile. So shoulder flexion, thoracic mobility, T-spine rotation, hip flexor mobility, strength are kind of the key areas that we'll be looking at in regards to their gymnastics movements. A lot of that comes from a locked up T-spine. If you don't have great shoulder flexion, we can take a look at your thoracic spine, make sure you're rotating well. The rotation will also come into play when we're doing things like overhead squats and snatches, and make sure that you have good thoracic extension. Hip flexors are important for rope climbs, toes to bar, producing power on something like a kip for a chest to bar and a ring muscle up or bar muscle up. So creating strength in that is a skill to develop for the athlete to allow them to express a little bit more capacity and get a little bit more endurance in their hip. Posterior shoulder strength is a little bit of maintenance work for individuals, and then making sure that they are staying healthy throughout the year, as well as it helps with your gymnastics work. So the last thing that we'll take a look at once we assess all of that is making sure that their positions under fatigue look good. So this is kind of what we mean by sport-specific work. So we'll put them through workouts and look at where their positions break down in a workout and why they're breaking down, and finding that quote kink in the armor. So that's kind of what we look for in your gymnastics positions and your weightlifting positions. The last thing is we want to develop new skills for these athletes, as they're going to be coming across harder and more difficult things, as we saw in the Open this year and as we saw in the games last year with the crossover double under. So for these athletes, we're constantly having to kind of see what's next, figure out what's next, and give them new things to play with and help develop those things as we coach them through the season. This will be a great time to just kind of play around and experiment with new drills, new movements, things that they maybe hadn't touched on in the off season. And then as a coach, you're there in person, helping them out, working with them, getting them to understand those positions a little bit better. So hopefully this gives individuals an idea of what they need to work on if they're at that semi-games level capacity. Your positions are a skill, and they are something that needs to be worked on in the off season in order to create a more efficient individual later on, because there is a bubble in the sport from semi to games where efficiency is a huge component of being able to move past that bubble. So a lot of you might not be in that semi-games level quarterfinals position, but we'll be making a video for you next week, so be on the lookout for that. If you're kind of stuck in the Open or you're an up-and-coming athlete, you can check that one out, and we'll have some different kind of strategies for you guys. So hopefully you find this helpful, guys.